because... I'll put it up.
So if you want to,
it is
sure,
minimised?
yeah. If you want to, no, don't do the notes. Just put it. It's all saved. It doesn't matter.
No, it's okay. I think it's gone because it's here.
Yeah, that's right. No, I just put it down because I didn't know whether you'd want it up. But if you want to open it up, yeah, that's fine.
What's the CEO's? Hagan's presentation is on. I'm trying to get it.
Does that work all right?
No. I had some problem reading this, so I just need to try.
It's not appearing.
Yeah, it's not appearing, so I'm not sure why. I'll do it this way. Hang on, I just copied it onto my computer and then copied it back to this computer.
Right. Okay. Sorry.
All right. Okay, thank you everybody for coming back to the afternoon session. This is going to be a roundtable discussion. So we have, as you can see on your program, we have a number of speakers who will have about 7 minutes each to speak. Unfortunately, one of our speakers, Mr. Ari Papas, has had to cancel because of illness, but he has sent us his PowerPoint presentation, so I will show those PowerPoint presentations, and we asked him questions on those points, and he has answered our questions, so we'll go through that as well. But the goal of this session is to look at the perspectives of different players in the court interpreting, legal interpreting arena. And for that reason, we have Silvia Martinez, who is a practicing Spanish interpreter and researcher, who will be talking to us about the results of her Bachelor of Arts Honours research into how agencies deal with the legal interpreting assignments. Then we have Ms. Françoise Matthews, who is also a practicing interpreter, and you have heard from these two ladies before who have commented from the audience. And Françoise is an accredited French interpreter, but also she has completed our course in legal interpreting at this university, and Sylvia also is a trained interpreter who has completed specialised interpreting courses. Then we will hear from Mr. Hakan Harman, Chief Executive Officer from the Community Relations Commission. He is the new Chief Executive Officer, so we're really looking forward to hearing from him. And I will then present Mr. Ari Papas, and the last speaker will be Mr. Bede Payne from the National Campaign Director of Professional Australia, formerly known as APESMA, and he will tell us about the industrial side of things. I'll let him talk to us more about that. So we'll start with Sylvia's presentation, and we'll take the questions after all of the speakers have presented.
Hello everyone, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. So my thanks to UNSW, in particular to Sandra, Ludmila and Adela for all the work that they did in setting them up, and congratulations also on what, for me at least, has been an excellent day so far. As Sandra said, this is my little presentation today is telling you about a small research study, because it was part of a BA Honours, you'll be happy to hear, rather than one of those huge PhD theses. At the time that I started it, which seems like many years ago, and I just finished it last year, so the actual study, the data that I'll be talking to you about was collated last year. I was both working within the research area and working as a practicing interpreter in the legal interpreting field specifically. And one of the things that really interests me, beyond the theory, beyond everything that we talk about, what do we need in quality interpreting, is how do we make it happen? And the tiny aspect that I've looked at is how do we actually get the legal interpreters to work in the courts and tribunals? What is it that the players that have an impact on that are actually doing to make sure that the quality interpreting can be provided? So the study that I did then has two groups of respondents. The first, or one of the groups, are registry staff working within Australian courts and tribunals. The criteria for participation as a respondent was that they needed to be people who understood the organisation's selection and quality control criteria in dealing with the engagement of interpreting services. And as we all know, within Australia, that engagement happens through language service providers that get engaged by the courts and tribunals to provide the services in different languages, and subsequently also engage interpreters from the different languages to work, interpreters who either work on a freelance basis or as casual workers with the agency. So that's the second group of respondents within this study. Conducted through anonymous online surveys, looking at two separate surveys, one for courts and tribunals, another one for language service providers, but looking at similar aspects. And the kind of things that I want to tell you about today specifically go to selection criteria. In terms of the respondents, that pie graph, I can even use the laser pointer. This section here were the responses from courts and tribunals. In terms of these are the jurisdictions that those courts and tribunals come from. The only jurisdiction that wasn't represented in the respondents was the Northern Territory. Every other jurisdiction is represented there. We had a total of 20 respondents. 8 were actually courts, and 12 were different forms of tribunals. The largest representation is from the federal jurisdiction, followed by New South Wales. But I was actually quite happy that it was a 33% response rate in terms of the people who participated in the survey. Some of them self-excluded because Supreme Courts, for example, some Supreme Courts across the country don't actually deal with the engagement of interpreters, so they weren't included in those respondents. From the language service providers, the interpreting agencies, a smaller group of respondents. I had 11 responses. I must say our sign language colleagues were the first, the sign language agencies were the first ones to respond. But again, initially I was concerned about the number of responses that I was getting from language service providers, but in having a further look, there was a lot of self-exclusion from agencies that don't provide legal interpreting services. So the fact that 9 out of the 11 were large agencies with over 100 interpreters in their panels. The different colours here, the red is we did have a large organisation that only provides services in Aboriginal languages. The yellow are organisations that only provide services in sign languages, and these others were a mix of migrant and sign languages. So I think what makes sense to me is that the organisations that are getting engaged to provide the interpreting services across Australia are the larger ones that can provide. So I don't think it's such a bad response rate, if you like. What I'm happy about is the fact that we have representation from all language types, which I think is really, really important. Again, concentrating on the selection criteria, something I don't think any of this will surprise any of you, but from my perspective, it was important to actually get evidence and go beyond the anecdote, go beyond my own experience or my discussion with other interpreters about how our services were being engaged, but actually seeing what is happening. And what I did find is that both sets of respondents are really clear that legal interpreting is a specialised field and that people working as legal interpreters do need specialised training. Difference there between 88% of courts strongly agreed with that, 58% of tribunals. They tended to explain that with the differences in formality, the protocols kind of involved. And that was something that came through the open responses, that in particular from the courts and tribunals, they see specialisation as relevant to knowledge of protocols and knowledge of terminology. I think from everything that we saw here today, that specialisation actually requires more than just terminology and protocol. It is also about that really clear understanding of what does accuracy mean within a legal setting in all of its requirements, but that's part of that difference. Language service providers were really clear that it does need that a legal interpreter needs specialised training. But in contrast to that, we don't see that specialised training coming through in the selection criteria. What is there as a minimum requirement is 1 minute, excellent. What is there as an actual requirement is NAATI professional interpreter or below, depending on the availability of language. For me, one of the most interesting things here was exploring the connection, or what do people, particularly the service users, what do the courts and tribunals think that NAATI accreditation provides? And where there was absolute evidence, because there were a number of questions that addressed it, is that the majority of courts and tribunals understand the professional interpreter level as including specialisation already. And we know that that's not the case, that the case at the moment is that NAATI accreditation at the professional level warrants that someone has been able to interpret at that general level, which actually NAATI describes within its website as semi-specialised. It's considered the minimum professional, but the interesting thing is the service users think that a NAATI professional interpreter means someone that has at least received specialised training. For that, I mean, I think there's a gap there in that knowledge. Good news is that the changes that John talked about will eventually, within not such a long time frame, actually match their expectation with the certification that is available. Personally, I think that's a very important aspect. Just very quickly, for courts and tribunals, the key criteria in terms of their selection of language service providers, the first one, the range of languages, expertise in legal interpreting, and cost, of course. 45%, so under the majority of the language service respondents have specialised legal interpreting panels. I think it's essential for that kind of specialised panel to exist for the providers to be able to supply the right kind of interpreters. Very good news is a majority of respondents actually do keep details of specialised training in their operational databases. So they've got the information to make decisions, and the majority of that 73% of respondents indicated that they do give preference to higher qualified interpreters when they need to make the assignments. Again, very small, only looking at one aspect, but I do think an important aspect in terms of actually giving quality a chance to take place in the place when it needs to. Thank you. And
do you have thank you. I don't need any notes on. Okay. So I am Françoise Matthews, a French interpreter and translator. Nowadays, I mostly work as an interpreter in court. This is my third career and only my 7th year as an interpreter. So I'm sure many of you here are much more experienced than I am. But I feel quite passionate about our profession, and I'd like to share a few things with you. I had two realizations early in my career. I was called for my first trial when I was grossly underqualified. I was a paraprofessional. The court knew it. They were desperate, obviously. They sort of put me to the test. I ended up doing a 3-week trial. What I learned there is that it was very difficult, very challenging, and very interesting. Therefore, I decided to upgrade my qualification. I did that straight away. I got to the professional level. I worked a lot more in court. And then the second realization came to me. That, and that's got nothing to do, this is not criticism of NAATI, which I respect totally, but being at a level 3 level doesn't really adequately prepare you for the challenges of court work, linguistically or otherwise. Now, fortunately, this was around the time Sandra Hell was preparing a new course called Legal Interpreting in Legal Settings at this university, and I enrolled in the first batch. And it was just what I needed. If I may read a few lines from a posting I put on the AUSIT forum straight after I finished 2 years ago, I said, the weekly lectures cover, among other things, the New South Wales and federal court system, police interviews, understanding not just the process and the rules that govern the court, but the power play that goes on below the surface, and the many challenges of interpreting in court. The course is well structured, well presented, clear, comprehensive, and always interesting. The tutorials are language specific and get you to practice with real documents and real dialogues, down to practicing in a moot court with the law students. You're blushing by now? Yes? Good. So for me, it was really perfect. I not only learned a few archaic words, I understood suddenly in legalese what's mentioned, or discovery, or election. But just as important, I understood, particularly about trials, that they're highly ritualized, choreographed events with very strict sets of rules where the truth is not always what matters most. So the great lesson from that was that if you improve your understanding, you improve your performance. Now, I'd like to mention something about the fact that the courts don't always provide the support that we need to perform at optimal level. Most of the time, I find the courts and the lawyers very helpful, and I've had some fantastic experiences. At the other end of the spectrum, I feel that some lawyers show little understanding of our role, of working conditions, and the importance of preparation. Again, I'd just like to read a few lines from another posting on the AUSIT forum. I was asked at the very last second, and I mean that last second, I just happened to be in the building on the day. So I was asked at the very last second to interpret in a trial that was in its second week. I was told, this is a quote, all you have to do is interpret everything that is said in court, therefore you don't really need to do anything. I do worry when I hear that. At that stage, when I was told that, I didn't know the charge, I didn't know the full name of the accused, I didn't know any of the basic facts of the case. Everybody in that room knew those things and what had transpired during the first week, except me, who was meant to interpret accurately every word spoken by anyone in that court. And from then on, it went downhill, actually. Now, my third point is how I think some protocol would help with that kind of thing. I'm talking about serious matters, trials, basically not just every court appearance. Now, at the moment, the system is ad hoc, and I don't think it should be left to the goodwill of lawyers, even though most of the lawyers are full of goodwill. What I think we really need is a combination of education on both sides, lawyers and interpreters, and I would like to see some mandatory protocol clearly stating who is responsible for briefing the interpreter, what must be included, and at what stage. The last point I want to make is the role the agencies can play. I really think see the question of quality interpreting in court as a shared responsibility between the courts and the interpreters, but the agencies have got their roles to play. And I'd like just to throw a few ideas. I think they should always pass on complete information regarding assignments. Sometimes I get asked to go to court to do interpreting. Right. Doesn't it mention hearing or sentencing? No, please do. Or it says criminal matter. Now, is it aggravated sexual assault or drink driving? I'd like to know. Okay? Insist on some form of briefing for the interpreters if it's a trial. Give preference to trained interpreters. Encourage interpreters to undertake further training by paying the more highly qualified ones significantly better rates. And I know we're talking about ideal worlds here. If suitable, advertise courses and PD relating to court interpreting. And if there is a complaint, please request to have it in writing, give right of reply to the interpreter, and pass on the response to the court. So these are just a few thoughts to mull over.
Thanks, Sandra, and good afternoon, everyone. And once again, thank you very much for inviting me to attend and address everybody this afternoon. It's actually, I was just looking, exactly 3 months today. It's 24th of January, so no, it really is a pleasure. A couple of things I wanted to run through today. One is, and I may be sort of addressing the converted already, is just one little slide and to talk to you about what it is that the Commission actually does. One of the first expectations that our minister, my minister, set upon me was to review everything the Commission does and come up with a plan and do it tomorrow. So we're sort of very heavily involved or knee-deep into reviewing everything that the Commission is involved in. And I've been consulting with many different forums and stakeholders of the Commission. And as we do that, so we've met with community groups, community leaders, we've met with people that are multicultural coordinators who are responsible for delivering multicultural policy of the state. We've also met with the leaders of each of the respective agencies, or clusters as they're called, because I actually wrote to each of the Directors General. Some of them have seen me themselves, which demonstrates to me a huge commitment to multiculturalism, and very much the narrative that I've been talking to all of the stakeholders as I address people is that this is the most successful multicultural state on the planet. And I don't hear a lot of people saying, no, it isn't, because we are. I think there's a perception issue about Australians and Australia. So I think that's an issue with that the world or the rest of the world has with Australia. But I think once you get to know Australians, where you can be an Australian of Greek heritage or Turkish heritage or Armenian heritage or from a Zimbabwean heritage, we unite as Australians, and I think it's really, really special. So I feel very privileged to be working for such an organisation. So in terms of today, about the CRC, I won't bore you with that because I know the 4 minutes, Sandra's going to be very quick to come up with those. I'll come back to language services because you all know we do that. But MPSP and advice, we provide some 1,200, 1,400 briefings a year to our Minister, the Premier, and other ministers as they go and represent communities around the state. We administer and assess every single agency in the public sector in the way that they deliver the multicultural policies and services program. This is a policy of the state which accepts the principles of multiculturalism, and it gives us our legislated responsibility and mandate to deliver the services that we deliver, language services being one of them. The next thing is the grants program. We offer a number of different grant categories to communities that undertake work or partnerships that we invite people to engage with us on, whether they be communities, the public sector or the private sector, to undertake partnerships to enhance social cohesion and to improve community harmony in our state. A very important role that the Commission plays. Community engagement, that refers to the role that we undertake to consult with communities. We do that in a structured way. We have an annual symposium. And I hope to see a lot of you there as well. That generally gets held in August each year. And we have and chair 10 regional advisory councils across the state. So we have representatives from agencies and communities in each of those regional areas that can bring issues, whether it's the adequacy of interpreting services in a particular community, in a particular language, in a particular region, because we've had, immigration and settlement of a particular ethnic group that have settled in that region. And these issues come quickly up to the Commission so we can react, so we can engage agencies that need to be there, get on the ground, or get on the ground ourselves to provide the services where there are gaps. Very important part that the Community Relations Commission undertakes. We represent the government of New South Wales on a whole range of committees. So we're the members rep on NAATI as a shareholder, and we have a say along with the other jurisdictions at that forum, and we're strong supporters, at least we are since the 24th of January, of the concept of NAATI and the concept of a very strong profession of interpreting and translations. And there's a whole range of other committees and things that we represent the state on. The State Counter-Terrorism Committee, Government Settlement Immigration Planning Committee, and a whole range of other committees that we actually sit on and participate in. The last one is we celebrate diversity, and we hold a whole range of events and functions. The Premier's Harmony Dinner, the National Multicultural Marketing Awards, the Human Rights Award, and a whole range of other awards that we coordinate, support, and a translation award, multicultural types of awards at different, like film festivals and the like. Now, in terms of, I've already mentioned some of these, so we fund NAATI, we total supporters of translations and interpreting and tertiary education and the accreditation or certification. We are an advocate for a strong profession. I've mentioned that before. And being a New South Wales government agency, there's a strong focus on probity and process and practice. And those of you that are on our panel will probably know that or have witnessed it at some stage. In terms of our language services, I say that we've got 25 plus years of experience. We are a fee-for-service organisation. We compete in a contestable market. And increasingly, since this new government came into power in 2011, both in my previous role at the State Library and my colleagues around the public sector, we're all being asked as stewards of public money to account for how effectively we are, at spending taxpayer money. So that contestable market I'll come back to. We provide interpreters to courts and tribunals through an MOU we have with the Department of Justice and Attorney General. They've got a new name now. I read it this morning, but I can't remember it. Yeah, just since the new. It's not that different. 10,000 plus court assignments a year that we undertake. We have a stringent recruitment process, an induction program, feedback sessions for panellists. I've seen some of you at. We do provide training in legal interpreting. I'm going to come back to this because I think some of these are bold statements which we need to do much better at. We have a legal glossary in English and I think 5 or 6 other languages that's available online for our panellists. There are service standards and, the last but not least, the award employment conditions. There's an annual renewal of our panel members. Now, some of you might think that's a pain, but we do have an annual renewal process. There's a complaint handling policy and procedures. We have a robust workflow system that manages the entire business, and there is probity in the way we allocate assignments. The current review that I'm undertaking will develop a new business and marketing plan, including for the Language Services Business Unit. There is a government demand for contestable service provision, so we have to justify how well we provide our services in comparison to the private sector, and why the government should be in the business of providing language services. These are questions I need to answer that I will be asked. There'll be a jurisdictional comparison. We'll need to review our operational methods. There may be a new logo and branding for the business. And lastly, and really, as I said, not least, we need to take a really good hard look at ourselves. We need to look at investing in new technology, in innovations, improving the way we provide training, getting better connected with universities and supporting them, whether it be through scholarships or being a strong advocate and a voice for the profession. So it's a really exciting and fantastic opportunity to be coming into this space. But we've got our work cut out for us as an organisation, and we're supportive. So I'm actually going to stop there. So I think I'm through. See, you rushed me, so I went through really quickly. So thanks, everybody. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for the previous 3 speakers, and now I will be the voice of Ari Papas. Okay. Some of you may know that Ari Papas is the person in charge of community interpreting, which includes court interpreting for this agency called On Call. So these are the points that he said he wanted us to hear from him. Acknowledge that it is On Call's responsibility to provide a user-friendly environment for on-call interpreters when working at any jurisdiction. The second one, it is On Call's responsibility to provide professional development for its interpreters on professional issues relevant to their profession. It is On Call's responsibility to work with courts in order for interpreters to have adequate briefing on the matters, that is, interpreting the charges at a plea hearing when one hears them for the first time, it is not easy. And then Ludmila asked some questions, and this is the first one. Has on-call found it achievable? So all those issues. Do courts generally cooperate? Is it possible to obtain additional background documents for committal hearings or trials? Example, list of charges, proper nouns, etc. Answer, yes, only when there are contracts in place. So I think this is a very important point that no one's mentioned before, that if you have a contract like you would in conference interpreting, then that can happen. Contractual relationships between on-call and an entity have in place key performance indicators for both parties, and as such we can request certain deliverables in return. So I think that's a good point. Then another point from Ari, work towards improving the acoustics in a courtroom. Already On-Call has invested in the latest technology that interfaces seamlessly with existing court audio equipment. The question, are you referring to the portable interpreting equipment or anything else? The answer is yes, portable equipment of a new generation that interfaces seamlessly with court audio equipment. We are trialling this out in WA and Victoria with great success. And this is, I think, in response to many interpreters' complaints about not being able to hear what they have to interpret in the court. Then the expectation that the one and only assigned interpreter should be interpreting for everyone present who does not speak English, be it defence, prosecution, needs to be reviewed. And we mentioned this when Alex was talking about how they have 2 interpreters and here we only have 1. Question, has On-Call initiated any steps regarding this? Yes, once again, only in contractual agreements. And last but not least, interpreters must be protected by the language service provider, and the expectation that the interpreter must perform whispering interpreting for hours for an accused, say in the county court, is an impossible and unacceptable expectation. So back to working conditions, one interpreter doing all of that. Is anything being done about it by On-Call, and are the courts... Oh, sorry, let me know. I missed the... What was it? This is a difficult one, as currently governments are actually requesting users of language services to reduce costs, and this is what Hakan was saying too. I feel Professionals Australia have a role to play in all areas of conditions and industrial relations. On-Call welcomes the ACCC draft decision to award Professionals Australia the right to negotiate enterprise bargaining agreements. And as an ex-practitioner and currently an administrator, I find it difficult to understand that spoken language interpreters do not enjoy the same conditions and remuneration as sign language interpreters while delivering the same services in similar domains. The conditions achieved by sign language interpreters were not handed over by language service providers, but they were won by ASLIA and the sign language interpreters themselves. So this is an important point for everybody else who is not a sign language interpreter. If one asks what is so unique about that language cluster, the answer is they represent mainly Australian background interpreters, non-ethnic mainly. They have a very assertive and demanding end-user group, which is well organised as a consumer group when it comes to communication, unlike the ethnic communities councils, which have no agenda on language services. And finally, they operate under the Disability Act, unlike spoken languages which fall under political agendas of all sorts. Please emphasise this last point on my behalf, as I have been advocating this concept for many years without any support from stakeholders in the industry, and namely spoken language practitioners themselves, as I feel they are definitely part of the problem. So I think before I hand over to Professionals Australia, which Ari makes mention, the old APESMA, the main objective of this last session is to discuss how we can all contribute to finding solutions to the problems. So if we sit back and say, well, it's not my problem, you know, you fix it for me, I want better pay, better conditions, better everything, and we don't do anything about it, it will never happen. So the idea of this panel is to come up with ideas about what each of the different stakeholders can do to improve all of those conditions. So I'll pass the floor over to Bede. Do you have a presentation here?
No. I'm going to draw. Well, that's probably the nicest thing Ari Pappas has ever said about me or Professionals Australia. So, and I do know that he's not here to say it in person. Can I just get a feel for who's in the room before I start? Is if you're a practicing interpreter, do you want to just chuck your hand up? And who are the rest? Are you educators? Educators? So if you're an educator, yeah. And what about other people? Who else is in there? Students? Students to become practitioners. Translators, yeah, practitioners, yep. When I say practitioners, I mean translators and interpreters. Yeah. I apologise. So, and there's some legal people in the room as well. No, one, yeah, excellent. Two. Okay, so I always like to start with the raw truths. The average salary for an interpreter, as listed in the previous census, was $21,000 a year. The average salary for a translator was $31,000 a year. The average amount of hours worked by an interpreter was 24 hours a week. The average hours worked by, did I say translator, interpreter just then? Interpreter. The average hours worked by a translator are 24.5 hours a week. If you equate the interpreter's salary out to a full-time salary, it's still under the minimum wage. And when we say 24 hours a week, that is based on people that want to work full-time. So it's not they work 24 hours a week because they want to. In the recent draft determination that Ari refers to, the ACCC, one of the most conservative organisations in the country, said the market does not create efficiency or support welfare, which is something that is not in their prerogative to say, and in my experience they've not said it in about any other industry. So we are definitely working inside the industry, an industry which I would say is the most disorganised and the most fragmented of any industry in this country. That's my opinion. So I want to talk about why that is, and I like to draw, so I've done this. So now I've drawn this about 100 times, and I've actually put it. You get the point. I've drawn this hundreds of times. I've put it in paint. I've had graphic designers do it, but I prefer to do it this way. So that's the industry. You have a government at the top, and the government said this morning, budget cuts, budget cuts, budget cuts, budget cuts. So the minister and the person that Hakan here reports to says, spend less money. And they put pressure on the core clients. And in this case, the core clients is the court system. So you have a government saying, do less of that. Less money. Spend less money all the time. So then the accountants that work in the court system and the accountants that work in the health system, in all the other core clients that you work in, 95% of money in this industry comes from government, by the way. So the core clients are government. It's government paying government to run a service primarily. So then these people in health and court say to the agency, which CRC of one is and On-Call is one, they say, okay, spend less of our money. Spend less of our money and deliver more instances of service. Spend less of our money. Because the people that write these contracts, the people that write these tenders are accountants. They are not language services professionals. So then the agencies, CRC and On-Call, and those of you that know Ari Pappas will know that the things he says on his slides are true. On-Call actually does want to do those things, but they are pushed constantly to do less. To do less. So then the contracts force the agencies to drive the price down. And then what do? What does the agency do? The agency says to you what? Less money. But it's worse than that, because how many of you just work for one agency? Just one person in the room works for one agency. Who works for 2, 3, 4? And it goes on and on and on, right? So that's you. And this is Ari Pappas right here. And he wants to give you more money. He wants to train you to be the best interpreter you can be. And he wants to pay for your accreditation by NAATI. Can he actually do that? Well, he could. He could. But if he does it, you take that skill, you take that accreditation, and you take that and you deliver it to another agency. So the market is structured to be run by people that don't know anything about language services, writing contracts that are just as suitable to buying toilet paper as they are to buying language services. And I don't say that flippantly. Health Purchasing Victoria, who buys toilet paper, also buys language services. Now, that's not a joke, that's true. They push price down in tenders. They ignore the good policy written by people like CRC, OMAC in Victoria. And then ARI gets put in a position where if he actually puts money into you, his business is less competitive than the one that doesn't. So that's where we're at. So how much time have I got? I've got a few minutes. So that's what the industry looks like. And look, I'm not an interpreter. My job is not to be an interpreter. My job is to be an advocate for the industry at the moment anyway. So this is what we say. We say that the only way that you can fix the industry is to do a suite of things. The first thing you need to do is to have the core client and the government understand risk and understand cost. So these people here and these people here don't really understand what it is to deliver an interpreting service. They see your instance as a $70 or $80 or a $90 instance of service. They don't understand that you being in the court stops that from being a mistrial. If you weren't there, that could never happen. There could never be delivery of justice, and there could never be a smooth transition from one point to the another point in the court system. So you are saving the state money. They don't understand that if you're in the health system, that if you deliver a NAATI qualified interpreter in a healthcare setting, that the CAL community member leaves the hospital 35% sooner. 35% less bed stay, 35% less cost. So it is our job, the industry's job, my job, the people sitting here's job, to talk to these people about what it actually costs. Not the $70 that they spend, but how much do they save? And how much do they save not just in financial terms, how much do they save in risk? We all know about the Willie Ramirez case. Do we all know about that? It's a famous case in America, no interpreter. He became a quadriplegic because of misdiagnosis and it cost the system $71 million. So that's the risk that we're talking about in the health setting. The risk we're talking about in the court setting is even potentially worse. It's about putting someone in jail when they shouldn't be there. It's about letting someone go when they should be in jail. That's the danger we're talking about. So what else do we need to do? We need to make sure that we don't demonise the agencies, because people like ARI are in the same position as we are. They're meat caught in the middle of this sandwich. We have to work with the agencies to make sure we can change this system. But the one thing we actually have to do most is understand the system as interpreters. We have to understand the complexities of it, and we have to understand that the professions out there that don't suffer this fate are professions that have strong unions and strong professional associations. So, do you think that the doctors suffer this fate? Of course not. They've got a professional association and union in one. It's called the AMA. You'd know it very well. They don't call themselves a union, but they definitely are. And doctors are well paid. They work with both clients and suppliers. They work with educational bodies about educational supply and supply of numbers, and they lobby the government directly. So who am I? I am the person that has been working on this from Professionals Australia, and I've been given a project to do, which is set up a viable union, a viable advocate for you in the short term while you get off your bums and work out how to fund it, and that means joining an organisation like ours. So at the moment it's being funded by engineers and scientists, and we're just, you can thank them in writing at some point, but at some point you have to take over your organisation, which would mean joining Professionals Australia to do this work. So what we have done in the short term, thank you. What we've done in the short term is we've set up a system where we are capable of advocating directly to government, and I've now met with every multicultural minister, including the federal one, and put something on the table to have a national forum where people like myself and the agencies and the academics sit down and talk with each other and say, this is the problem, let's fundamentally fix this system. Let's not write contracts that are based on the cost of delivery. Let's write contracts based on the savings that we can generate by being highly qualified, highly professional. So I'll leave it there, but what I will say is that in no other industry would you have someone like Anari Pappas write that about someone like me. Normally we would fight each other. And this industry is so fragmented that even the bosses in this industry want interpreters to come together and start to advocate with them to government, and this is your opportunity to do that. So I'll join your union, basically.
Okay, thank you very much to all the speakers. I think we can clearly see the relevance of all of what they have said. So now it's time for you to ask questions and to have an open discussion about any of those topics. So hands up for anyone who wants the floor.
My question is, my comment is to be, but first thank you very much. I thought it was an excellent panel, and the variety of opinions and experiences has been excellent. So back to Bede. 3 years ago, in Britain, the government has privatized all the interpreting services, which ended up in a total debacle. Interpreters are being paid peanuts, even less than ever. The quality has gone to the dogs. There are endless complaints. There are countless examples of the miscarriage of justice and mistrials. None of this has done any good in the long term. So, do you have any thoughts about that and why interpreting never makes it to the priority list of the government budgets?
Is this on? Can people hear this? No. How do I do this? It's on now.
Yes.
Okay. A immigration minister, a multicultural affairs minister who will remain nameless, said to me, Bede, this is a side issue of a side issue. And I think we need to understand that for us it's not a side issue. For us it's a very important issue. But from a political agenda issue, from a political agenda point of view, the front page of the Herald has the Prime Minister sitting in a fighter jet. And every time that I get quoted in the paper about language services issue, it's like page 25 of the advertiser, and it never sort of makes it into the main game. So that's the first point, and it's our responsibility and by our I don't mean me, I mean practitioners and stakeholders' responsibility to make it an issue, to make it a political issue. And we need to advocate, we need to be capable of advocating to doing that. And right now, we're not capable of advocating. We're not. And we can be, but we're not. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing about the point about privatisation, the interpreting industry and the translating industry was privatised in Australia in 1995. So it's only here in New South Wales where we have even one kind of player in the space that's not a private entity, and still that's a contestable market, so you have to compete against the rest. Sure. No, and then you have, of course, and then you have health departments specifically hire generally small amounts, but I'm not sure about New South Wales, but for example, the Alfred has 12 interpreters in-house, and then they bring in 200 freelancers. So I'm I'm not having a slight at you guys. I just don't know the realities of every single one. But in 1994, the industry was privatised in Victoria, and it then started to be privatised across the rest of the country. And the amount of freelancers compared to the amount of in-house on a national basis is there's way more freelancers, and I think that's not a contestable point. So we have already seen that, and I would say that in the places where we still do have government departments and we still have in-house interpreting, we should fight like tooth and nails to keep it. And the places where we don't have it anymore, we have to be sensible about how we advocate to make it sustainable. And that's what, I have ideas about that, but what I put to the ministers is bring all the stakeholders together, sit down, don't bullshit each other, talk about the problems, and then let's talk about actually finding a practical, sustainable solution.
A question for Francoise. You're very active in putting postings on the AUSIC Notes board. One which really interested me was your good experience, particularly in a court case in Broome that you had. Now, everyone's going to be very depressed listening to all the rest of us talking about the problems and so on. Can you just very briefly say, well, what did they do to actually make that a good experience for interpreters?
Is it on? Yes?
Yep.
Yes. A 4-week trial that was quite complex. I was given some kind of telephone briefing 2 weeks before, and the judge made the mistake, if I can say that, of asking me if there was anything I wanted. I said yes, and I proceeded to send him a list of my wishes. And it was not just about chairs and water, it was about a lot more than that. And I got everything I wanted, and actually I got a lot more than I wanted. Somebody told me afterwards that actually the protocols in Western Australia are different, and they have to provide all the documents before. So I'm not sure whether I had a particularly enlightened judge and court, or whether it was the rules and it's always applied. But it certainly worked wonderfully well in our case, and I got provided virtually every single document I possibly wanted from experts, from the witnesses, and it just made my job. There were 2 of us, by the way, too. I would not have been able to do it by myself, and it made the job possible, even though it was still incredibly challenging and difficult at times. For instance, just the instructions to the jury, the presiding judge read his report. It took 6 hours, and he read at full speed. So it was never easy, but I got everything I wanted, and it just made a huge difference. So that was a very positive experience indeed.
My question is for Dee. I already said that there are 4 housing interpreter services in New South Wales, and combined we employ over 200 staff interpreters, and probably have a panel combined over 500 or 600 sessional interpreters. It seems that over the years we've always been excluded from any kind of discussion about our profession, and we don't seem to be treated as a stakeholder. So I'm just wondering, would we be invited in this discussion about progressing of better award for interpreters? What I'm going to say is that our interpreters have been fighting through the union for the last 20 years, as far as I know, to get better award, and they're really being paid peanuts. And working in health 5 days a week is really a big challenge. So they got nowhere because there are only 200 of staff interpreters in entire New South Wales, and that's not a powerful union force. So that's my question to you. And the other comment I wanted to make about Victorian interpreter services. In the past, Victoria used to have something similar to health interpreter services in New South Wales. When they introduced activity-based funding probably 95. They killed the interpreter services, they privatized everything, and now you have hospitals which have to do shopping for interpreters. They have to call a few different services when they want to get the interpreter instead of having one-stop shop as we have in New South Wales. Thank you.
The answer's really short. It's not me keeping you out of it. I'm not the road.
When you're done.
Yeah, I'm not the roadblock to that kind of stuff. So what I'm trying to do is bring stakeholders together, not smash them apart. And there's lots of challenges in bringing stakeholders together, and one of those challenges is that I just don't know them all, and often I don't know if there's anyone in the industry that knows them all because there's that many of them. So the short answer is it's not me keeping you out, and I'm very happy to work with any stakeholder, with any other union. I've already said to the HSU, I've already HWU in Victoria, HSU up here I assume, and I've already said to the CPSU for the federal government interpreters and translators, I will work with them. I'll work with every agency, every government department, so it's not me keeping you out. Yeah.
I think like Gary said today,
I think
it's a chance to make connections and links.
Yeah.
If I may just address that, I mean, just to clarify, the Commission's the only state government-owned commercial provider of language services. Their health interpreter service is an inward-looking and internal service provision in the state. As to why we've never worked together in the past, I'm not sure, but I'd be more than happy to be advocates, but we have a separate award. So, I mean, in terms of making connections and working together with health interpreter services, the CRC, the door is open.
My name's Vesna. I'm also a Gordana's colleague. I'm from Punjab, local health district. We cover 2/3 of New South Wales as far as public health facilities are concerned. I just want to make a very quick comment. It was something that Mr. Harmon had mentioned in his presentation about professional development for your court interpreters. And I know that both the CRC as well as New South Wales Health provides very good, I'll say an excellent professional development opportunities for their interpreters, both staff and sessionals. Most of our professional development courses, we do apply professional development points for NAATI revalidation. Our courses are from one-day workshops onwards. Lately we've noticed there's been a number of private organisations offering training. They offer an hour and receive 10 PD points. Now, on paper, it may seem fantastic with private organisations offering training opportunities, but I'd love to see the quality of a 1 hour so-called workshop. So I guess what I'm trying to say is with our staff in the Hunter, we have spoken about PESMA, we have advertised PESMA, we will now be talking and asking people to look at Professional Australian Association, but we will also be contacting you, Mr. Harmon, to develop our networks.
Thank you. I wonder if anyone can answer that about the PD points. Who decides on how many PD points a course gets?
NAATI. We're looking at him, aren't we?
Can you reply to that? Do you know
I've not heard the team.
Okay.
But it is written.
Okay, it's been noted. Okay, great. Sue, I think that's the next one, and then
Hello. Yeah, just a very brief point with regard to partly commenting on Francois' discussion of the trial and broom. I do understand that it is mandatory to have that the interpreters meet with, are briefed by the judge's assistant in Western Australia, and that's mandatory as far as I understand my court directive there. And in discussion as to perhaps a slightly stronger position for language practitioners in Western Australia, I think it's explained at another conference in Western Australia that was partly due to perhaps strong work by practitioners there, perhaps Aussie and also weighty in Western Australia, but also the sympathetic ear of the Minister for multicultural affairs in Western Australia, where they developed a language policy. So perhaps this is something we could work towards, perhaps in New South Wales, by developing a language policy that is more sympathetic to the needs of the language service providers and also the translators and interpreters. Just a thought.
I think before we give the floor to someone else, we'll give the floor to a representative from Western Australia, because he can reply. Yeah, go ahead.
So Michael Getty, I'm used to Principal Registrar at the Supreme Court of Western Australia, so that's the court that ran the trial that Francois was involved in, and I've also worked with the District Court involved in the protocol that was just mentioned. The catalyst for that was primarily the people smuggling cases. So the people smuggling case, you have a 3-week trial, perhaps longer, a person on boat or one of the refugees' native language, say Farsi, so you've got consecutive interpretation into Farsi, and then from Farsi to English, then you've got interpretation, listed interpretation to four Indonesian crewmen in a dock. Okay, so that's fairly complex. So that was largely the catalyst for it. It was a court-generated initiative with very good support from the profession. There is a protocol that applies to the protocol in the Supreme Court, protocol in the District Court. In reference to what you're saying, Dean, I'd probably put the court in the sympathetic. So consider the court different from the department funding the court. So the court and judges will be very sympathetic, and one of the reasons for building the protocol is so that there's a standard there which should be an upward pressure on salaries. So we're in your court.
No pun intended. That wants the floor first, but does anyone want to reply to Sue's question about the New South Wales policy?
Yes,
which we
I
don't
can.
have yet.
Very quickly. Yes, we are the only jurisdiction that does not have a language services policy as a state, and it's certainly on my radar. There's a lot of work both in terms of the review of the CRC, not just in language services, but right across the board, in particular on this case about language services, that we're going to be undertaking work, and that's one of those areas. Yes.
Okay, so the gentleman behind Sue,
Bob Connor, Indonesian interpreter. I just want to make a comment on the Ngāti points. I think what my comment is that I could come and do a course here, a 6-month course in court interpreting, and how many Ngāti points do I get? I do attend healthcare interpreting courses. I've attended a lot. I get a lot of value from it. But I get bombarded with emails from a particular company which says I can attend a course for, I think it's 2 hours or maybe half a day. Court interpreting, I can also attend one for 2 hours or half a day in health interpreting, and I get Ngāti points from it. I think that's the point that the lady's making.
Okay, there was someone here first. Was it you? Yes, and then was it? So here, put your hands up so that we can see.
First question is for Sandra. Perhaps it relates to the previous one. Francois mentioned that the legal training course run by you or at this university. How often do you run those courses, and how do they set up with the Ngāti requirements now in response?
Well, I'm trying to look at the point, so I don't know if John can. It's a subject within a master's program, and you can do it as part of, if you're a student in the master's program, you can take that as part of your program, but you can also do it as what we call a non-award course as an external student. So you can, that's what Francois did. She enrolled in that course, which is a 1 semester long course, 3 hours a week for 1 semester. So we have language specifically in a number of different languages, but we also have offered to offer it non-language specific as well. So that's something that you can ask us later. But all universities offer this. All universities offer non-award courses. So all of the universities this link video. Yeah, sorry, can you put
I'm an Estonian interpreter, and I want to ask Nati to reconsider the method of legislation for smaller language groups or smaller language interpreters. My name is Ino Salasoo. I became a court interpreter in 1959 by invitation. From about 1950, there had been around 3,000 Estonians around Sydney, and well, I think most of them spoke or learned English very soon, and they didn't come into brush with laws, so that's probably why it was only 9 years later that I was asked to become an interpreter. And in the next 10 or 20 years, I may have had one assignment per year or even fewer. Now, recently, in the past 20 years or so, more Estonians have come to Australia, and there may be a few more interpreters here, but still, when Nati was formed 18 years after I became interpreter, well then Nati didn't bother to think about the smaller language groups, and earlier today it was said that when it was suggested that the Nati should contact the overseas universities about getting them to test the potential interpreters, then the answer from the Nati representative here was that, well, we don't know what the overseas universities are like. Now, this generalization is really anything part to nations like Estonia, because when I came to, in 1950, when I was here with an equivalent of leading certificate from an Estonian high school, and this was accepted as an entry condition.
Sorry to interrupt.
Well, I just want to say that at the same time, a student from another European country had his equivalent certificate rejected. Therefore, the Nati should contact the universities in Estonia and work out a method with them how to arrange the legislation here in Australia for Estonian interpreters. Thank you.
Thank you. I think John already answered that question previously. Yes. Do you want to say anything else, John?
Only we'll pursue this outside.
Okay. All right. So you can keep talking. Any other questions to the panel members? Okay. Steve, and then the lady behind.
My name is Steve Olsen. I'm the chairman, manager of language capability at the Australian Crime Commission. It's not a question, probably a comment, because today I had a lot of mixture terminology, court interpreting and legal interpreting. I think it's not the same thing, because legal interpreting is more than simply court interpreting. It involves police interviews, it involves investigative interpreting, it involves forensic interpreting, investigative translation, and forensic translation. It also involves voice identification, recognition, etc., etc., etc. So when we're talking about training in legal interpreting and translation, I think these matters should be taken into consideration as well. because our industry requires professionals, people who are trained in these areas of interpreting and translation, and unfortunately today I can clearly say that there is a very big shortage of this skill. So this is something that both our universities and the industry should look into. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Well, we do include all of those other areas in our training. The problem is that we don't have that many students. So, the majority of practitioners have not done the legal interpreting training. But there are obviously a lot more that needs to be done with regards to training. The lady behind.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Paul. I'm a Mandarin interpreter, mainly working in court interpreting at the moment. While I was doing the court job, I had one thing in my mind that I think would help all the interpreters for their professional development. While the court has on transcript for all the court cases, I'm wondering how we can access the part that we did ourselves. I don't mean transcript for the whole case, for every witness and every speakers, but for only our part we did in the court. Is there any possibility that we can access the transcript, because it's done anyway?
You don't mean the transcript, you mean the recording. The transcript is only in English. So you mean the recording to self-evaluate.
That's right. It's very good for self-study and for improve our professional development.
I think
I'm not sure we
could probably answer that.
I don't think I can actually, in terms of the access to them. I mean, most, like the transcripts themselves are available. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, I can say that for research purposes, it is very difficult to access anything. We need to have permission from all of the participants in the court case, if it's a case that we want the recordings for, before we can access any of the recordings. But I mean, that's probably something that, if you want to self-evaluate, that's something that can probably be raised with the courts. Who will organise it and how will be paid for something else. But in the training that we offer, we have transcripts and we use authentic material, and we have also created simulated trials that we use for training as well. So there's a lot of opportunity, and our students do record themselves and do an evaluation of their own performance and write reports on their own performance and so on. So that's part of the training. That's part of the standard methodology in the training of legal interpreting. Okay, I think anyone else who hasn't had the floor before? No one else? Okay, this gentleman. And that's the last question.
Just regarding your answer to the lady, you say you have training, you can access the transcript, and you are simulating the court case, and you have all sorts of terminology regarding to forensic terminologies. So my concern is, do you have all sorts of the case, or just some of the case, or just criminal case?
Only the cases that are available. There are some cases that you can actually find online that are actually available. I won't go into details now, but we've got also transcripts. The transcripts are different from the recordings, so different ways to get that. But getting your own recordings of your own interpretation, that's a different thing. But thank you very much for all your questions and all your comments, and let's thank our panel for their
I was going to write down your email or something.
Conclusions and recommendations. While all this is putting the presentation up, for those of you who don't know him, Uldi's has been involved in interpreting, especially interpreting issues for many, many years. He's one of the pioneers in educating interpreters and translators at the community level, started from the old Deakin University programs when they were running. And now he works very closely with us here at UNSW as a lecturer and also as a researcher with me, and also at UWS. So he's got a big background behind him and a lot of knowledge, and also he's very well published. So.
Okay, sorry, I'm having time to do this. Sean, can you help me get what's on the computer rather than... Okay, thanks. This will not be death by PowerPoint. Thank goodness. Slideshow from the beginning. Okay. Good, thanks. I was asked to give a wrap-up because I'd made the mistake of doing this at a previous conference, and they couldn't think of anyone else. And I had some of the transcripts because some people who are terribly efficient send them in early, and so I could sort of sneak things in. And then, of course, a lot of people turned up on the day and told me things, and I had to write the conclusion by lunchtime without hearing what the people after lunch were going to say. So it's terrible making excuses, isn't it? Some issues. Okay. We've got some fundamental issues of jurisprudence philosophy here. Is the court a system, or is the court a forum? And in the British tradition, the court has largely been a forum with a thing like an umpire that's called a judge or a magistrate, and these competing parties that compete for each other. As the previous speaker said, it's not always the truth that's coming out. Now, interpreters are caught in this because you would think that the interpreters should be part of a system, but very often they're part of party strategies. Some lawyers will not use an interpreter for particular strategic reasons. Nothing to do with the court as a system, but simply because for their client that's what they think. Or if they use an interpreter, then certain aspects of the interpreter can be challenged and so on. So we're still at a stage of moving away from thinking of the interpreter as sort of helping one of the parties towards seeing the interpreter as part of the system. When we hear about West Australia saying the interpreter must get this, must get this, must get this, we're moving towards the interpreter as being part of a system. But in our jurisprudential philosophy, that's still not always the case. And therefore we get views of lawyers saying, well, you know, use interpreters there, not there, and so on. So we're still caught up in that. Second thing is it a vertical system? Steve's point just a couple of minutes ago, lucky I had this on, was really it's not only the courts. Now, the courts are a terribly tiny and in terms of volume, almost insignificant area of interpreting. For every person who needs an interpreter in a court, there's many more who need interpreters in police stations or in lawyers' offices or things like that. And for every person who needs an interpreter in the legal system, there would be 10 people who need interpreters in the health system. So in terms of sheer volume, it's actually small beer. Yet the courts have got this status, so that in America, for example, we have the Court Interpreters Act, which was enacted in 1978, and yet it's vertical. The fact that a court cares about interpreters should tell the rest of the legal system that is important, and yet in America police interpreting is still way behind. Other areas are not the courts, they're at the apex, but are we having a trickle-down effect? Here I think it's quite interesting because some of the multicultural development that's going on in our police forces is probably more enlightened than what's going on in some of our court systems. We tend to have, and it's a really good thing about Australia's language policies and interpreting policy, that a lot of stuff happens from the bottom up, even if the politicians don't care about it. And that's a very good thing. But the court sits at the apex, so it's symbolically important what happens there. In terms of volume, it might be small. It's also a transitory need. Many lawyers will have a career without ever using an interpreter in a court. Some judges, depending on where they are, will hardly ever have it. So what you're trying to do is develop a system that is there when it's needed, but it's very transitory in the sense that you ask lawyers about interpreters, they'll remember, the 2 bad incidents. Yeah. They had 8 other incidents or 18 other incidents where the interpreting went perfectly fine and they can't remember them. And that's how transitory it is. So the commitment there is often very wonky because it's so transitional. It's very important, therefore, that those protocols that are being developed actually are able to work across the system. There's a lot of responsibility and expectations in the court and in the court system. I was interested in Sylvia's thing that lawyers expect that if you've got NAATI accreditation, of course it means you're trained as a court interpreter. I mean, I'm a lawyer in a court, and you say you're an accredited interpreter. What else can you be except trained in court interpreting? And yet most people with accreditation are not trained in that. So we have these expectations, and we have this question of responsibility. Who is responsible for actually, briefing the interpreter? In West Australia, we now know, but who is responsible in the other jurisdictions? Hardly anyone. It's very hard to know sometimes where that responsibility lies. Then the players outside, of course, the agencies. I'll come back to the agency. I think that's very important. The training and certification, where we have this unusual situation, and whenever I occasionally escape from Australia and present at international conferences, I always have to sort of spend some time explaining that, there's different ways you can get accreditation. No, it's, in the United Kingdom, with the public service interpreting diploma, you have to do the diploma in order to get that certification. In Australia, no, you don't. You've got a choice. You can train or you can sit a test. People say, why would you train if you could sit a test? And our government authorities are, and quite a few people have commented on this, our government authorities are interested in the certification. Whether a person is trained or not, it's very hard to get that message across that you need that training, and the certification is there for legitimation purposes. If you can send an accredited interpreter, you've done the job. If anyone complains about a translation, the answer comes back: it was done by an accredited translator. So the measure of quality is that somebody with accreditation actually did it. So getting beyond that is really difficult. Ooh, more on the pile, the interpreter. Sounds like breed. And this is in many ways because the interpreter, and interpreters are honest people. An interpreter can say, look, I've got my accreditation, or I've got my recognition in languages that don't have accreditation. I've sat the test, I've done that, and so on. They call me to go to court because there may be nobody else, or because it's urgent and I can do it, and so on. But what's my training? What's my background? I haven't had training. I've passed a test, or I've got recognition. Is it my fault then that things might go bad in court because I haven't had that ability to sort of actually perform better? And I think the interpreters, often many interpreters are sort of confronted by this, But for the interpreter, it's also a transitory experience. They spend the day in court and go away. Some interpreters specialise in court work, but some might do it only very, very occasionally. They're honest people, but they've been put in a sort of a dishonest situation. And I'll come back to that because it's important, particularly in the interpreters in the unaccredited languages. Protocols. We are seeing that there are now more protocols. I think it's really a matter of making those protocols work. I'll focus a little bit on what we can do in 30 minutes. Come back to that in 3 months and in 3 years. So, court side. And I've got a series of just comments that I've heard throughout the day. These are the ones I was able to read beforehand. Okay, the exciting ones are still to come. Forensic processes are carried out by teamwork. That's the former public prosecutor saying that. This notion of teamwork, I think, is absolutely crucial. And I don't think it's crucial only in the legal area or the court area. I think it's crucial in all areas. And somehow I think the notion of impartiality and neutrality makes some interpreters feel that they can't be a part of teamwork. And we need to think about this because I think I don't find this so much in the health system. The health interpreters seem to have a notion of teamwork, particularly in areas like psychiatric work or speech therapy, things like that. They know you've got to have teamwork. In the legal system, this sort of notion of impartiality might even go against our teamwork. Plus also, why should a highly paid lawyer see a teamwork with an interpreter? Isn't the interpreter something like the fire extinguisher that you turn on when necessary? So with teamwork, we heard this morning about other sorts of teamwork, and the teamwork that is very important in roles in quality monitoring. And we saw that in international court examples, but it really was very good to see that, in fact, all participants in the courts have a role in this quality monitoring. So now the recommendations, I mean, this is not a recommendation which is going to be wrapped up in paper and sent off to the government, and we've had lots of recommendations, particularly from Sandra Hale's report in 2011 and so on. But this sort of issue of seeing the interpreters as a part of a court system, I think, is very important. We're just beginning to see that. I think that West Australian example is so important. You know, to see it as part of a system, it's not part of something you can pick and choose and so on. It's important to see it as a system. As little as 30 minutes preparation improves quality. That was a quote we heard today. I mean, it's remarkable. Now, okay, I cheated. I got Françoise to say what she said because I wanted to say what I'm going to say. And the issue is that Françoise, okay, we had a judge who said, "Is there anything you need?" Highly unusual, all right. And we had an interpreter, Françoise, who never lets a chance go by. But okay, maybe if the case was in Dinka or in Chin, the judge mightn't have asked that. The judge might have had more difficulty actually understanding the English of the interpreter. The interpreter mightn't have had the professional confidence to ask those things. Mightn't have had the wits to say, "I need a partner. I can't do a 3-4 week case by myself," and all the rest of it. So I think we need to think about some of those issues, that they're you know, lack of professional confidence, I think, is an enormous problem in the interpreting profession, translating profession too, and Ari Papas has said some things about that. It's sort of, so I think we need to pursue lines like Foley and Dixon are pursuing to make sure that the comprehensive materials and briefing are part of court operation. This is all a slow and inconsistent process despite goodwill. Yes, there are very good-willed people in the court system. But it was reinforced, another quote, have a document that says what has to happen. And I think this is very important. It's not just protocols, it's use of present facilities. That lovely new courtroom in Brisbane where they've actually got an interpreter's desk and so on, but it's sort of all folded up, and the people in the court actually had never seen it used, like, oh, sort of there, but, you know, yeah, okay, and no interpreter ever asked to use it. So we've got these sort of real problems. It exists and yet it's not used. Okay, supply side. Oh hell, I forgot to put the animation in. I'm terribly sorry. Active agencies, if you've given the contract. Now I think this is really, really important. That contractual agreements, they need to make provision for all these sorts of things, for preparation for the number of interpreters, not just for Auslan. The number of interpreters in spoken languages too, facilities in the court, use of technology, etc. But I also think that agencies are quite entitled to raise the demands of how interpreters prepare for legal assignments. I've been in situations with an agency where some of the tribunals do give some briefings, some information about the case, and where interpreters, when the operator person making the booking actually says, oh, and they've given some information to the case, the interpreter says, oh, don't bother about that, you know, it's okay. Now, what we know from research, okay, it's largely conference interpreting, but it's the best material we've got. A level of anxiety is strongly correlated with good performance. In other words, if an interpreter is not slightly anxious about what they're going to do, if they're lackadaisical, if it's okay, we know what sort of interpreting is going to be. It's going to be interpreting where it's not even the good enough interpreting, it's good enough for me interpreting. And there's a difference between good enough for me interpreting and good enough interpreting. I agree the perfect is the enemy of the good, but when interpreters themselves actually don't care about the briefing or so on, I get very worried. And it's again this lack of professional confidence and so on that I mentioned before. Okay, NAATI, greater emphasis on education and training. They actually said that, okay, it's there, it's written. Okay, remember, NAATI has put it down on paper. Okay, it's the first time I've seen NAATI saying that. Now, NAATI was originally set up, the view was that it was going to be a transitory organisation and that eventually all people would be trained, who were going to be interpreters and translators, and never happened. But now they're saying greater emphasis. Okay. And going back to Sylvia's point, the NAATI professional interpreter accreditation is assumed to demonstrate specialised training by lawyers. They believe that. And why shouldn't people believe that you've been, well prepared if you've got accreditation in any area? And it affects, of course, the lawyer's best efforts to ask the most strategic question. Now, we need specialist legal interpreter training across the range of languages, not only for a specialist level for certification purposes. What's been happening is that because of the INT report and because of the focus on, okay, specialisation will come after the professional level of accreditation, we tend to think of specialisation as being tied to that level. But I'm very concerned about what happens with DINCA or CHIN, where there mightn't be very many practitioners with a professional level and so on. My Baltic colleagues, now we Balts are very, we terribly law-abiding. We don't get a lot of Baltic clients in the court system, so it's not really on there. But there are many languages in which there are very few accredited interpreters or none, and yet that specialist training is needed. it also needs to be available to current practitioners. We need to think about also non-language specific training. Now, when Helen Slatcher was talking about her non-language specific training, did you like the stuff about peer assessment and so on? I was sitting there feeling that everyone in the room was going, I never had any peer assessment. What's this strange newfangled educational thing they do? It must be something Australian. It is in Sweden, which was mentioned earlier, virtually 100% of interpreters are trained. They've trained interpreters who interpret in well over 100 languages, but in only 40 languages have they had language-specific training. The rest of the training has been in non-language specific areas. So even though that sounds sort of counterintuitive, surely you need the training, there's things you can do with language pairs and so on. It doesn't have to be entirely non-language specific, but we need to think about these needs. There are many smaller languages that will need court interpreters, will need legal interpreters, and all the rest of it. It's very essential that any specialised training in the legal area is not only reserved for that specialist level that's been spoken about in the INT report. And lastly, organised like this is before I heard Breed and all the rest of it, but exactly, organised like the Auslan interpreters. It didn't drop down from heaven. They actually went out and lobbied, and they got their supporters on side and so on. And it is incredibly important, I think, to do this. One of the reasons why we haven't got progress, and Breed mentioned that in no other industry would the bosses want to talk to the workers the way they do in interpreting. That's not quite correct. There are common issues. For example, the Metal Trades Industry Association, the industry body, yes, it often has fights with the Metal Workers Union. Okay, that's normal life. But when they actually get an issue that they can agree on, whether it's technological innovation or tariffs or things like that, they will work together to lobby the government together. So it's not unknown in Australian industrial relations and policy that the bosses and the workers actually work together. We're used to seeing, of course, the headlines when they don't work together. But I think this is very important. We do not have an industry body. There has recently been a body founded or resurrected in a way, which is the Commercial Language Companies Association. That hasn't had much of a profile yet. But we need to work towards an industry body where everyone can work together to lobby for these changes. I'll stop there. There may be a question or so on, but I think these were the main points that I got from the day. I think we need to work more and get to realise and implement those many recommendations that have now been coming up in the last couple of years. Good, thank you.
Thank you very much, Uldis, for an outstanding summary. I think it's amazing how you brought together these things. Yeah. Now, I won't bore you with a summary of Uldis's excellent summary. Unfortunately, we don't have time for any questions. I think we've already had a discussion. I think that you share my impression that it was an outstanding day, very rich in information, exchange of opinion, the quality of presentations. I want to thank our presenters. I want to thank the audience, those who are here and those who have followed us from interstate. I want to thank Sean for
Sean Cheng, our colleague, for helping us with the technology, supporting us throughout the day, and also our admin staff from the School of Humanities and Languages for organising, for making it all possible today, including morning tea, afternoon tea, and so forth. Now, the question may be where to from here. We hope that if you found today stimulating, if you learned something new, if your way of thinking perhaps became wider, that is an achievement in itself. I won't repeat the slogans and the calls that we have already heard throughout the days. I hope, I suppose like Sandra, I'm optimistic in the long run, and I hope to be as resilient as Sandra. And Sandra, thank you very much for inspiring this seminar, for organising it, and let's hope that there will be more meetings like this on these grounds. Thank you again.
To catch up.
No, it was fantastic. And Alex was asking if we could send your eyebrow.
Yep, sure. Okay, I'll distribute that. Yeah, because it's sort of like it's obviously done on the run.
You can email it to me.
I'll email it to you. Yes. Okay.
Oh no, you can't.
Yeah. No, I'll send it to you. Yeah. I've got a 5:40 bus.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I don't have to run immediately this minute, so I'll say hello to Alex.